Genesis chapter 16. I'll be reading the first 16 verses. I solicit your prayers. The Lord will indeed speak to us. Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 16. Intention is for this to be the concluding sermon from this passage. If you have that passage, would you say amen? Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt or evilness on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." But Abram said to Sarai, "Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She says, "I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered because of the multitude." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." And so she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly here I have seen him who looks after me." Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. This is the word of the Lord. In Genesis chapter number 11, verse 30, it's a brief biological note that says Sarah bore no children. It was the first 6 verses, I believe it is, of the 11th chapter that there was a chronology of Abram's family, beginning with his father, and nothing was said of the other women, but there was a footnote that Sarah bore no children. Well, Abram was given instructions that he should leave his father's house and should travel, leave the Ur of Chaldees and travel to a land that God would show him. Leave the land of your relatives, your father, house of your father, and go to a land that I'll show you. In return, I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you and your name will be great. Verse 4 of the same chapter says, Abram went out as Yahweh had told him. Abram was 75 years of age. Verse 10, there was a famine in the land of Canaan, and so Abram and his family left to go to Egypt because they had word that there was food in Egypt. His father didn't make that trip. His father had passed away in Haran. As going to Egypt, Abram, for some reason, was afraid that the Egyptians would steal his beautiful wife, Sarai. Not sure why Abram thought that, but he conceived an idea and said, told his wife, when we get there, I want you to know I'm going to tell them that you're my sister, not my wife, because I'm afraid if they know you're my wife, that they'll take you to be a wife to Pharaoh. Well, the scheme didn't work. He indeed did tell the Egyptians that Sarai was his sister, although she was his wife, and they took her anyway and made her one of the Pharaoh's wives. It was a trip of mercy that went completely wrong. Mercy because they were hungry. There was a great famine in the land, and when there's famine, there's usually death. People are starving. And on top of the critical condition of people back in Canaan, in Israel, many of whom I'm sure they knew, passing away, were desperate for food. Now, the situation has become much more complicated, where Abram's wife, Sarah, has been taken from him and given to Pharaoh. Well, the Lord sent plagues. God saw what was going on. The Lord sent plagues upon Pharaoh, and in confusion, maybe clarity, Pharaoh came to Abram and asked him, why are you doing this to us? What's happening? Why did you bring this upon us, these plagues upon us? And Abram didn't deny it. Why didn't you tell us that Sarai was your wife? If you told us that, we wouldn't have taken her as my wife or one of my wives. So take her, take all the possessions, all the things that I've given you as a dowry for Sarai. Just keep it. You and your family, your wife, take her and go. And they left. He left Egypt a rich man. God had blessed him. God had blessed Lot in Egypt also. Lot was also rich. So they went back to their land, and they discovered that with all of the livestock that they had been gifted from Pharaoh, they didn't have enough land. So they needed to go out and discover more land that they could take and could use for their livestock. And so Lot chose his area first, and then Abram took the land that he wanted by the plains of Jordan, but near the land of Canaan. And they settled there. We know what happened with Lot in time. He became infatuated with what was happening in the very sinful, vile cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot had to be rescued by his uncle. Unfortunately, Lot's wife hesitated and did not immediately leave as she was instructed by the angels and then through Abram. And we know what happened to Lot's wife. She was crystallized into a statue while she was looking back fondly at a life of sin and debauchery. And so Lot left without his wife. Chapter 15, the Lord appears to Abram, makes the promises that he had already made to him in verse 12. God repeats those promises. It's not a secret. I'm not ashamed to say it. I want to remind you of what I'm promising you. The text also finds us invading the privacy of the patriarch Abram and Sarai. Sarai bore Abram no children in chapter 16. They'd been through a lot, as I mentioned last week. We already talked about the travel that Abram made with Sarai. He had to leave his land. He not only left his land, but he left the land of Sarai, her home, her family. They left. It may have been her favorite house. We don't know. As they're leaving, She may have looked and seen the house that she grew up in. We don't know. But by faith, she left with her husband, Abram. They got to the land of Canaan after they stopped in Haran. And in Canaan, that lush land, prolific in raising fruits and vegetables, a famine had hit the land of Canaan while they were there. They then left and went to Egypt, Sarai still beside Abram, at his side. Went to the land of Egypt, and while she's there, hoping that things would be better, and certainly their stomachs growling for lack of food, she gets there, and instead of finding food, she found that she has a problem. Another man is going to take her by force as his wife. Well, they had been through a lot, and on top of that now is the shame that is imposed upon women in this time of history who could not bear children. It was a personal shame. She was barren. She had no children. She could do nothing about it. It wasn't her fault. She did nothing wrong. This was just the cards that life had dealt her. In those days, women who couldn't conceive, they were shamed and ostracized. Their self-worth was diminished greatly in society. The Lord himself said that children are a blessing from the Lord. Yahweh instructed our foreparents, Adam and Eve, to be fruitful and multiply. But how can she be fruitful and multiply when the Lord will not allow her to bear children? There's something cruel about this problem that she has. She wants to have children, but she can't. Her stress level and anxiety must have been off the charts. She was affected not only physically by this, but perhaps emotionally as well. When we listen to her words and trying to find a solution for her husband, it seems as if Sarai wanted to please Abram more than she wanted to please herself. I can't get pregnant. Go into my servant Hagar. Yahweh has prevented me from bearing children. Why don't some things happen for us that we pray for? Some things that we want that are holy things. Why does it seem to be so difficult sometimes? Sarah perceived, she said, I have this woman right here in my house. It's convenient. We don't have to go out and look for anyone else. She's already here. She's my servant. So I would suggest that you go with her. And maybe I'll have a child by her for me. It was convenient, wasn't it? But let me warn you, Christian, that convenience alone is no guarantee that it's God's will. Sometimes convenience is just the easy way out of a situation. It doesn't mean it's God's intention. Abram listened to the voice of his wife Sarah, took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years, she gave her to Abram, her husband, as his wife. Or Abram listened to the voice of his wife, he also should have wanted to hear the voice of God. It's fine to get advice, godly advice, but make sure in getting advice from other people, we hear the Lord confirming that advice. If Hagar was attractive, Abram may not have wanted to hear from God. Let's be real. Abram may have said, I'm all in for this. Sarah's idea is not a bad idea. We are dealing with people who live in the flesh. as you and I are. Hagar was a marginalized North African slave woman from Egypt. It was determined by her employer/owners, Sarai and Abram, that she would marry Abraham. That third verse in chapter 16 says she's married to Abram. Hagar, a slave, and apparently she had no say-so in this decision. We have no dialogue between Sarai and Hagar. Someone else to determine her destiny. This was a life chosen for her, being seen and treated as someone else's property. Apparently, no one asked her how she thought about this. The arrangement was made and carried out. He slept with Hagar, verse 4 said, and she became pregnant. Hagar came into a home as a servant to Sarai, and Sarai's suggestion that she and Abram come together and a child was conceived. Oh, the sun set on this boy once he was born. Young Ishmael. Hagar loved his smile. She laughed when he frowned or fussed, and when he cried, Hagar was quick to give him what he needed or wanted. She and Abram and Sarai, they all watched him grow inch by inch. They heard his first words, watched his excitement when he took his first steps and walked. It's hard to believe this growing boy was not long ago in my stomach. What a miracle he was. And Hagar was so thankful to be blessed to be a mother and a wife, a spouse, a companion to a special man named Abram. Abram was different, she said. He was not like the other men of his generation. Abram loved Yahweh, God. Hagar noticed that that's Abram. He was a praying man, one who was full of faith, and he trusted his God. She was always fascinated when he would tell his stories about how God spoke to him and told Abram to leave his home, his whole family, except his wife and his father and his nephew Lot. Then he would talk about his travels and how he didn't even have a map. With no plans, he and his wife and his father and nephew and a few servants, they left the Ur of Chaldees. She marveled at his faith and Sarai's cooperative obedience to travel with only the invisible God leading them. Abram had traveled not knowing where he was going. Hagar may have thought to herself, I don't know if I could have done that. Eventually things changed because God blessed Sarah to get pregnant finally. But the boys didn't always get along. There's 13 years difference between the two. They didn't always get along. That caused some stress in the home, she would say. I really felt bad for Abram because both Ishmael and now Isaac are both his sons. And Abram couldn't show partiality. So he was just quiet when Sarah would complain about Ishmael and how she said he was treating his younger brother Isaac. Things escalated as the boys became a little older and they became more competitive, as if they were trying to win their father's approval. Things had begun to become more tense between Sarai and Hagar began to resent the way that she talked to her son Ishmael. Then one day things came to a head. It was bad. It was real bad. It was so bad that just as cold as ice, Sarah told Hagar and Ishmael, you see that door? Go out that door. Take your stuff and leave. Leave? This is my home too. Where am I supposed to go? Abram's my husband also. Hagar's humiliated. She would soon be desperate because she had no one to rely on for her daily needs of food for herself and Ishmael. And what would she do for shelter? And the things she had previously, before she was so unceremoniously evicted, this strong African woman who had left her home in Egypt, and although she mistrusted and developed a strong dislike for her mistress Sarai, Hagar did trust and believe in Abram. And with no family support, no community support, no community status, with no legal resource, and who was forced to walk away from whatever financial resource and support Abram gave her, Hagar and Ishmael walked into the crisp air with only the food in their stomachs. Of course, Hagar would develop great disdain for Sarai, who persuaded her husband Abram it was okay to have a physical relationship with Hagar, as if she was disposable property, just so Sarai could satisfy her desire for a child, fully knowing that child once conceived and born would not be the child of God's previous promise. Did Hagar feel used, taken advantage of? There's a good chance she did. Hagar must have thought, this is my home too. Why do I have to leave? This is my son's home. In fact, it's the only home he's ever known. I looked at my husband Abram for support and comfort, but he just stood there like he didn't know what to do. Unfortunately, my husband was of no support or comfort. Where would I turn to in this crisis? I'm going to be homeless. My son's going to be homeless. And we're going to be hungry. If Abram sided with me, Sarah, I would even be more upset. And if he sided with Sarai, he was probably thinking I was going to be upset with him as well. It was bad. Where was I going to go? This was my house also. It's not right that we are forced to leave. Oh, Hagar must have had a frightening thought. I just paid a very high price for cooperating with Sarai's plan. Let's be real. I slept with her husband, with her blessing. I bore his child. The pains and the discomfort of pregnancy for all these months and give birth, painful birth, to this child. And this is now what I get. Sarai got her son, excuse my English, and I got kicked out of the house. This is not fair. Church, even when you cooperate, even when you play by the rules, there is no guarantee that things will always go well for you. Abram's torn apart inside as he thinks about this gorgeous African woman that was forced out of his home and his life, he believes. And Ishmael, he's a part of my seed, my legacy. He's walking out the door, but I can't stop him. Oh, I could, but it'd tear my home completely apart. Abram's world was coming apart from the seams. It seems like yesterday, he thought, when Hagar came to their home as a servant maid. But as time went on, it was Sarai who couldn't get pregnant and suggested that Hagar become her surrogate. At first, it seemed to be rather mechanical, this relationship between myself and Hagar. But as time went on, he realized he really cared about Hagar. As a matter of fact, Abram loves her. Not only do their bodies come together as she tries to get pregnant for Sarai's sake, but there is most likely now an emotional bond between Hagar and Abram. The day Hagar and Ishmael left, all Abram could do was to think, is there something else I could have done? Then I would imagine from time to time he's sitting in the home and he's wondering, where are they now? There's no letters coming. There's no messenger sending updates about their whereabouts and how they're doing. Have they made it yet? Where have they decided to stay? Did they stop and rest? Did they find food? Did someone show them kindness? In the meantime, Hagar, she's confused because she doesn't understand how this God, that she's heard Abram talk about so much, how could this God allow her and her young son to be put out of their home? The only home Ishmael knew. For all we know, it could have been Hagar was the one who had the decorating touch. She may have been the better cook in the house. She may have been the better wife in the house. But she's the one who gets put out. Where is this God of Abraham he talks about? What good is God if God is not here when we need him? Hagar would end up doing the very same thing her now estranged husband, Abram, did some years ago, and this is it. At God's instructions, Abram left his home in northern Iran. And where was he going? He didn't know, because God hadn't told him. He would later be known as the father of the faithful, and now Hagar is having to leave her home. And where was she going to go? She didn't know. Not only was Sarai, Isaac watching Hagar leave, but Abram was also watching the woman he loved leave also. But there was somebody else watching. Someone else who wasn't living in the home, but was watching everything that was taking place. Someone else watching this drama unfold. It was God who was watching her pick up whatever belongings she had, mount her camel or her donkey, and start down that road called somewhere on her way to nowhere. In Hagar's lowest moments, when her legs became so heavy, when her feet ached so much, when her stomach growled and her head hurt from stress, perhaps when she couldn't hold back the tears any longer, when she couldn't pretend to be brave anymore, and the fear in her eyes was real, when she couldn't mask the hurt any longer, the betrayal any longer, the God she had accused of being absent, like Abram was absent for her, Abram's God, the one she had accused of being absent, that God spoke to her. When she heard the voice of God, what would God say? What would she say? She's walking with her son and she hears the voice of God in her ear. I would imagine if it was me, I would have to stop. And she probably stopped and told her son, he knows where we are, Ishmael. And so he also must know we have nothing, not even a roof over our heads. The most comforting thought that she could have is that she could tell her son, he knows. And when the soothing voice of God fell on her ears, and when the Lord told her his plans for her life and Ishmael's life, Hagar realized something. God's plans are not Sarai's plans. God's plans are not even Abram's plans. They're not my plans. They're not your plans or my plans. God's plans are his plans. God has a different plan for your life. Oh, Sarah may have meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Genesis 50 says, In her excitement, oh, she's not depressed now. In her excitement, Hagar may have grabbed Ishmael and said, "Don't worry, son. God has a plan." When Sarai put us out, God was looking. And it looks like God is going to take us in. Maybe I was only a surrogate in Abram's house, but the Lord has shown me that I also am a child of the King, and I have a seat at his table. Ishmael, don't worry, and don't you ever forget this day, the day when your mother had nothing, but then again we had everything because we had God. Now let me move to my proposition. May I say, Hagar may have been kicked out of Sarai's house, but she landed in her destiny. Spiritually speaking, that word destiny is the will of God. Sarai may have refused to see her, but God saw Hagar. Sometimes, church, you have to be kicked out to get where you're supposed to be. But I also want you to know, for those of us who are struggling, I want you to know that your struggles are not your whole story. Can you repeat that? My struggles are not my whole story. If things are low, God can lift them up. If things in your life are sideways, God can straighten them out. If circumstances are backwards, God can turn them around. If your situation is turned upside down, God can turn them right side up. What I'm trying to tell you is this: the Lord can turn it like the guests at the wedding in Cana in John 2. Jesus can turn it for you. We have 66 books and sacred letters called the Holy Bible, filled with examples where God lifted the lowly, strengthened out the crooked, turned the backwards around and the upside down right side up. I'm certain if you are like me, there are times when we're tempted to doubt if God is going to do what we believe God is saying he will do. May I ask you, is God asking you to trust him today? With something, someone, some circumstance? Are you willing to trust him for some sacrifice? Is God asking you to trust him for a need in your life? Are you struggling with this question? Can I trust this God like Hagar did? I want to ask you, can you really trust and test your faith? Can you worship God like Hagar did, even in the pain of struggle? Can you really still worship God? I asked you last week if you feel stranded by your circumstances. I want to remind you that you're not alone in your circumstances. Whatever circumstances you are in, whatever difficulty you are or will face in life, just realize the storm is only temporary. Repeat after me. The storm is only temporary. The difficulty of the journey is not your final stop, because it's not your ultimate destiny. Why? Because as Hagar, the Egyptian woman who is not a naturalized Israelite, she gave God a name. Be'er Lahoi Roi. You are the God who sees me. And I want to remind every one of you and everyone who's listening or watching, God sees you no matter where you are. God sees you. God sees me. This God sees your pain. This God knows your trouble. This God is familiar with your complicated circumstance because he is a God who sees. And not only does God see, but God will respond. I know some of you feel like you're starting over. I've lived 40, 50, 60, 70 years, and look what it's accomplished for me. I'm starting over. That's Hagar's position. But in walking out the door and leaving her home, walking past the toys in the yard, brought back memories of a better time. Little did Hagar know she would be a woman of faith and a mother of a nation herself. I want to remind you that God's not finished with you yet. God is using the ingredient of pain to make you triumphant. And God is going to use the bricks of your struggle to pave the way for your triumph. At the right time, God will reveal his ultimate plan, the grand finale of your life, your true destiny. One day your tears will be turned into joy and your mourning turned into dancing. Why? Because God causes all things to work together for good to them who love God and those who are called according to his purpose. Perhaps today you can say, or perhaps it'll be tomorrow or another day, you will hear God say these words: this is your repurposed life. Now I want you to repeat the last thing I'll ask you to repeat. God is working out his purpose in my life. Now repeat it after me. God is working out his purpose in my life. And Sarah heard the words that Ishmael would lead nations. She would be a mother of nations, multitudes of people herself. She must have bowed down, sat down, laid down, and she must have thought, I'm going to be the mother of nations. I could have and I should have trusted God all along. And she heard the words, Hagar, welcome to your destiny. There's a song that says, and I will give you the snippet of the words, the lyrics. What I went through is history, and victory is my destiny. What I went through is history, and victory is my destiny. Do you believe that? Do you believe that you're serving and worshiping a faithful God? That God is true to his word? That all of God's promises are yes. Sarai's estimate of Hagar's worth, it didn't matter to God. And even though you may think your life is over, God has more for you than what you think. Although Sarah couldn't see Hagar's future destiny, God saw her. And God knew it. And that's all that matters. Let's pray.